That's a That's a 4, 3.
Hello, and welcome to this special Memorial Day edition of Destination Midway. I'm Karl Zingheim, the staff historian for the USS Midway Museum, and for today's episode, we're coming to you live from inside the VFA 151 Vigilantes Ready Room, otherwise known as Ready 1, located in the gallery deck aboard the Midway. This is a ready room that is actually a holdover from the actual use by VFA 151 in the last years of the Midway's career. So we're very pleased to be in such a carefully restored and lovingly rendered pilot ready room. This is where the aircrew from any given carrier squadron, in this case this is an FA-18 Hornet squadron, would conduct all squadron business, including some briefings as well as post-mission debriefings and other kinds of social activities that the squadron may engage in while aboard ship. Joining us today for this special commemorative edition is retired Vice Admiral Paul Ilg, who had an extraordinary 30-year career in the Navy, both in naval aviation and in senior policy-making and command positions at the latter part of his career. Thank you for joining us, Admiral.
You're welcome, man. Thanks, Carl.
What we're going to be covering specifically with today's episode in commemoration of Memorial Day is some aspects of an exciting, and not necessarily the positive term, meaning of the phrase, exciting deployment, the Midway's first combat cruise in 1965 off North Vietnam. Now, this webcast, like all our others, is a live interactive event, so if you'd like to make any observations or questions, please feel free to use our chat box feature, and we'll address your input as we get to them. If you'd also like to make a donation to the Midway Museum, please visit our website at www.midway.org. So I'd like to be able to bring our audience back to 1965. Admiral, you were a pilot assigned to VA-22, the Fighting Redcocks, which
Correct.
was a light attack A-4 squadron. And so the ship arrived in April of 1965 for what, despite 20 years of her career, was really her first combat deployment. And at that time, Vietnam was still looked upon as a crisis point, just as Laos had been a few years before. And there was an idea of using carrier air power, as in Korea, for interdiction missions. And so what were the nature of those missions that you were flying in the first part of the deployment?
First start of the deployment was early on in the Vietnam incidents. And it was essentially road reconnaissance, going after trucks trying to interdict the supply routes to South Vietnam. Some bridges, railroad, and those kind of things early on.
What would you say was the op tempo that you were experiencing as a light attack pilot in that stage of the war?
Oh, some of the most flying we'd gotten in any time at sea, really. When we were flying, interdicting in the South Vietnam, we were up to 3 flights a day, all in the daytime, no night flights. So it was pretty hectic. Up north, there was just 1 or 2 flights a day max.
Were you conducting any kind of night ops with the air wing when you were up north?
Up north we were.
So you're flying night and day,
right?
As often as the flight schedule would permit.
Exactly.
So it turned out, of course, that this was quite a grind for the air wing. And in May, just a solid month into the deployment, it was decided to take a break and come back to QB Point, the Naval Air Station next to Subic Bay. And so on the 11th of May, it was decided to have a grand formation of having the entire air wing fly off en masse to return to the Philippines for this break. And of course, VA-22 also has its position. Could you describe what happened with that outbound flight? You're still near the ship, getting ready to complete the formating to make the grand procession of the Philippines when something happened.
Of course, the whole air wing is getting airborne. Everything, all up airplanes were getting airborne to fly off the QB Point. We had in VA-22, 22 A-4 Charlies that were ready to go. So we were going to orbit overhead, join 12-plane formation. as was the rest of the air wing too. Some, depending on what location you were in launch, would already be joined and headed out to QB Point. When we got joined up, I was number 11 out of 12. So there's already a bunch of airplanes in front of me. And I was locked onto the formation on the number 10 guy, so I'd get in position. Number 12 was joining. And what happened, number 12 came in hot. He ended up smack right underneath me. So his vertical stabilizer was right in the base of my main fuel cell. At the time, in the cockpit, I couldn't tell exactly what had happened, but the airplane was still flyable, which was the good part. I still had control, just wanted to make sure I wasn't smashed into the other 10 airplanes. Broke off, not exactly sure, but still in control. And the ship was still right there in the center of our circle.
And you were doing a quick scan of your instruments?
You're looking at the instruments, and then looked at the fuel gauge, and it just was continuing going down.
That must have been a total shock to you.
It was.
To see the gauge
well,
move.
We're not going to have gas here shortly. But there was 2 tankers configured A4s in our 12 plane, and one of them was Bill Newman, who had flown with a number of times, and he came and joined on me. I imagine the skipper, who was Don Wyan, Commander Don Wyan, told one of the tankers, and it was Bill, to join on me.
We're very fortunate as well to have a narrative from Bill about this incident. So perhaps this would be a good time to call that up.
Sure.
And we now shift the focus over to Wingman Bill Newman, who just happens to have the refueling buddy pack on his A4.
He was streaming a lot of fuel. You know, you do things in a jet reflexively based on your training, and I think I immediately started transferring fuel into the buddy store, the in-flight refueling package, from my aircraft tanks, because it suddenly, instantly dawned on me, he's going to need fuel. Whatever's going to happen, he's going to need fuel, because it's just pouring out of the bottom of his jet. And so I joined up on him, and we were on the radio, of course, so I took the lead, and I streamed the drogue from the buddy store, and Paul slid right behind me and plugged right in, and he was losing fuel dramatically. I think he was down to 300 or 400 pounds on the fuel gauge, which is only a few minutes of fuel at that altitude in a jet, and I set up a long approach to the Midway with Paul plugged in. And at about 1.5 miles, I said, "Okay, Paul, you're 1.5 miles, and you can unplug." And he did. He has wheels and flaps down, and I just stepped out to the side with my plane, and in the event he missed wires, which he did not, and he had a safe landing. He kind of had a spurt of flame when he touched down from the sparks off of his arresting hook and all the fuel that was pouring out. But he told me, he said the gauge never got above 200 pounds without the steady amount of fuel I was pouring into him. So he had a big hole in that airplane, for sure.
Very fortunate then that you actually had someone who had a refueling capacity on there, and you were close to the ship at the time.
Yeah, so like a rendezvous overhead the ship, but usually too, overhead the ship like that with a lot of airplanes, you have trouble finding what you're looking for. Well, Bill didn't have any trouble finding me because I was streaming out the fuel just like a smoke stream. But it was kind of all elbows and trying to slow down and get my gear and flaps down and get on the ball.
Perhaps you could refresh everyone's recollection of what Bill just said about how close you were to the ship by the time that he could finally disengage from you.
Well, I disengaged from him. Right. He was flying right astern of the ship so that I could have a good lineup. And we got within 1.5 miles, 2 miles, and was able. He told me where we were, so because I was watching the basket. And so unplugged And then, like I say, he got his slowed down as fast as possible, get the gear and flaps down, and try and stay on the ball. Because and I was indicating 200 pounds the whole time that he was refueling me. It didn't budge off 200, and I don't know if that was actual or the gauge was stuck there because of the rudder.
No, it may just as easily that the fuel was coming out as quickly as they were putting it in.
It could have been, yeah. And most likely was. Because as soon as I touched down and grabbed the wire, the sparks and stuff started flame, but they immediately went out because it was out of gas. The flight deck crew was there ready with the fire hoses, but not required.
Now, the other pilot who did strike you couldn't save his aircraft.
No, he went because he had lost his rudder was stuck in the bottom of mine, his vertical stabilizer, so he had no control. So he ejected and was picked up by Hilo, Midway Hilo.
So at least you were able to save your Skyhawk for eventual repair and return to service. But the question, of course, that would be on a lot of people's mind is, were you able to fly into QB with the rest of the air wing?
No, I'm afraid the rest of everything left me behind. I rode the ship in with everybody else.
Long 2 days, huh? Now, another extraordinary aspect to the Admiral's career was that after his tour with the Midway, you had ambitions to attend a certain kind of school, but the Navy was trying to send you to another type.
Yeah, they were trying to send me to postgraduate school, which would probably be good for my career too, but I wanted to go to test pilot school. But this was later on. It was after this deployment, and the next deployment when I was a flag lieutenant for the Admiral. But I was able to go to test pilot school after a year being a flag lieutenant.
So after making the horse trading with the detailer to get that assignment, you were a flag lieutenant, and that's largely the Navy equivalent of an aide-de-camp position. So you're an assistant to the flag officer, social connection, and arranger, and such. So I suppose when you're actually on a deployment with the Admiral, there isn't that much to do time-wise.
Well, you really figure out what's going on a lot more than just being in the squadron, because you see what all the squadrons are doing and what the flag staff, the Admiral and the Chief of Staff and the Ops Officer are trying to do across the whole ship's formation. But as long as in the evening, when the flight schedules were being made up, I just made sure that the Admiral had the movie he wanted to watch that night. Then I'd go to the ready rooms, and knowing where the targets were, I'd talk to the ops officer and try to get scheduled for that particular flight the next day as a flag lieutenant. But sometimes I just got to be the tanker pilot, but I got to fly.
So you have the distinction of being the flag lieutenant for Com Cargo 7, but flying missions as an addee to the squadrons on 3 different aircraft carriers.
Yeah. Risk and Coral Sea and the Enterprise.
All through the rather hectic 1966 combat line period. And what can you tell us about your experiences flying the Skyhawk? What kind of mount was it from a pilot's perspective?
Well, a lot of times, instrument flying, it was like on a needle. However, when you climbed in the cockpit, it was like putting on a backpack, because you wanted to go somewhere, the A-4 would do it. It would turn good. It was a good airplane, designed to be deliver a big nuke in the middle. That's why it had such long legs. But it was a good bomber also.
Now, because of your deal that you worked out with the detailer to get the test pilot posting, you had the good fortune to fly a wide variety of aircraft in the naval inventory for a variety of reasons. Among them was the Douglas F-4D, which at that time was known as the F-6 after McNamara changed the designation system. And the F-4D had been designed in the 50s as a pure interceptor, so it was a delta wing tailless aircraft that was designed to go from the deck to altitude to deal with bombers. So what kind of aircraft was that from your perspective?
It was fun fly. It was like a big A4, essentially, because it had that delta wing, but no tail. It was my first afterburner airplane that I flew, so it was fun. Used a lot of gas fast, but fun to fly. Landed well. A little washy at the slow speeds, but fun.
Yeah.
Fun bird.
Of course, being a test pilot, you're not merely just wringing out new aircraft as people would assume a test pilot does all the time, but you're also working on ironing out some kinks or quirks or coming up with new methodology and operating the aircraft. I believe you mentioned earlier that you had done some taxi or ground tests on certain aircraft.
Oh, I didn't mention that, but I did on the A7. I think it was a B. I did the BIS trials on the A7B there, and it was the automatic braking system. So you'd come around pretty heavy weight-wise, touch down and clamp on the brakes. See how the automatic brakes would bring you to a stop. Well, the first time I did it, the brakes locked, and both wheels were flat on the bottom.
All the rubber burned.
It did stop, but not just the rubber.
And of course, that must have been a wild ride because it's a rather narrow track on an A7.
It was, but it didn't take long to stop because you were just screeching to a halt.
Now, when you went through your initial flight training, were you strictly in a fixed wing pipeline?
Initial flight training, I was. It started out in Softly Field and then Whiting Field outside of Pensacola, and then Beeville, Texas, when we got into the F-11.
And then, of course, you went through replacement air group training and op type, and then, of course, your deployments.
But the first, at the time I had gone through flight training, there wasn't a carrier available to do arrested landings on. So I went to the fleet without being landed on the carrier. So we got that in the rag.
So you really had to pick it up at the run, in effect,
as usual,
because you're in a transitional squadron. One other interesting aspect about the Admiral's career as well is that although he's a designated attack pilot, lots of fixed wing experience, you still had to go fly helicopters too.
Oh, flown helicopters and gliders, hot air balloons.
So that was that rather standard in the 60s and early 70s when you're doing this, or?
Well, in test pilot school, we training and stuff. That they had just gotten their gliders. I think about 6 months before I got transferred out. So we got in the gliders also, but the helicopters and the fixed wing, multi-engine P3, flew a little bit of everything there.
So did that really prepare you well, you think, for your subsequent command tours for the second half of your career?
It does, only because you know what the airplane feels like. You don't really get the feel for the mission, per se, except with the helicopter. Of course, that's pretty easy to understand that mission, even though it's tough.
One of the Admiral's first command tours as well was being the XO and then fleeting up to the CO of VA-176 Thunderbolts. This was probably about the time they had just traded in the Skyraider for the A6 Intruder.
It was. A couple years before that, I think.
And of course, the Intruder is an entirely different form of flying. It's a
It's two-seater instead of all by yourself.
Two-seater side by side. A deliberate attempt at all-weather bombing for a medium attack delivery for the fleet. And what was that like, going from the hardcore light attack down in the dirt with the enemy type of operating to working with another platform that would probably operate largely at night or in really bad weather?
Actually, it wasn't that much difference. The big difference was you had somebody else to depend on as far as the navigation and the bombing accuracy. But you had controlled the aircraft more precisely too. But also, a lot of times you were doing daytime bombing as well with the A6. But you did have that buddy with you.
Well, it was probably another transition too, of course, is that now you're working in cooperation with a crewman.
That's correct.
A crewmate in the A4, of course, you're with yourself.
In the A4, you're depending only on yourself. Mm-hmm. But in the A6, you also got to depend on your bombardier navigator, which relieves some of the load, but also you're backing each other up. So.
Now, how much interaction as a pilot did you have with, at that time, was an advanced automated or computerized attack system known as Diane?
Very little as a
Very
as
little.
A pilot.
It was all BN load?
Mm-hmm.
So it was just getting instructions to fly precisely
right.
to allow a good bomb run.
Yeah, tell me when we're getting close and if we're on track or not.
Okay, we're going to be taking a break now to call up a special video for this commemorative edition. This is Destination Midway, and we'll be back to you in just 60 seconds.
That's a
Hi, welcome back to the Ready Room for VFA 151 aboard the USS Midway Museum. I'm Karl Zingheim, the staff historian for the museum, and joining us again is Vice Admiral Paul Ilg, who had an illustrious career in naval aviation, and we're focusing on a couple of highlights of his long career, focusing back into those harrowing days of 1965 in his first combat deployment, as well as the Midway's inauguration into combat. And we had mentioned in the first half of our program about an unusual collision in a formation situation that required some very steady flying, and you did receive an award for bringing back that crippled Skyhawk that day.
Yes, I did get the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Distinguished Flying Cross. Well, as it turns out, that didn't mean that his deployment was over. Certainly after the QB break was over, the ship went right back to Yankee Station to resume line period, and of course, full range of missions over North Vietnam and neighboring Laos. A critical feature for the communist effort against South Vietnam was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was the lifeline sustaining the communist insurgency south of the DMZ. Even at this early stage of the conflict in the northern part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail complex, you did have a rather sophisticated road network of roadways and truck convoys, and this of course became a prime target for both Air Force and Navy aircraft strikes throughout that period. We're moving into June 3rd, 1965, when there was a call for another mission to take a look at what was going on with the truck traffic in a remote corner of Laos, hard up against the border with North Vietnam. And we take it back to the Midway and Admiral Ilg.
Yes, sir. It actually, 3rd of June was about 10 days after I had done that exact same mission, with absolutely no sight of enemy trucks or AAA, just a quiet.
It was basically an armed reconnaissance daytime mission.
Exactly.
And you just had a wingman with you.
And wingman. this time, I really wasn't on the schedule for this flight either. The ops officer was, but he ended up with a migraine just before, and I said, well, I've got the charts. I went on that 10 days ago. Nothing happened, but I'll take this one. So Dan Gildner and myself briefed up on it, took off and joined and tanked over top of Vinh in Vietnam, and then headed on the trail.
And so let's turn back to our other guest, Bill Newman, who has an overview of what would happen to his squadron mate over the next 2 days. If we can call that video up, please.
You know, it was really, it really hit me hard when in June of '65 on that cruise, Bo was shot down over Laos and managed to evade for like 2.5 days the Pathet Lao troops that were looking for him. Figured that he was an athlete, and if anybody could hack it and wind up getting rescued ultimately by an Air America helicopter, Bo could do it because he was tough. And I have the greatest respect for him. We've been friends for many years now.
So lots of portentous things happening, and as it turned out, just the previous couple of months, rather early in the ship's line deployment on April 20th, your own roommate on the Midway, Phil Butler, had been shot down, or not shot down, he was actually flying a mission over Vinh on a night mission, and his own ordnance caused a detonation under his aircraft, so he was basically brought down by his own ordnance, and unfortunately for him, he was captured after several days of evasion and would spend the next 7.5 years as a prisoner of the North Vietnamese. So,
yeah, at that time, we were using mechanical fuses.
And, you know, I've known Paul for a long time.
Some of the times when you released the bombs, they detonated on the proximity of the aircraft, not the mechanical, electrical fusing. And that's what got Phil.
Yeah, and it just happened to be at a night mission. But in your case, you're flying with bombs, broad daylight. You just tanked over Vinh, and now you had to make that long run right up the rest of the Panhandle to head to that corner of Laos.
I did it at altitude. At the time, the SAM sites weren't firing. This was early on. We were lucky there, and let down to about 3,500 feet. 3,500 to 4,000 feet over the terrain, just east of Sam Nua, up in northern Laos, on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, just flying road recce, looking for trucks or any kind of movement on the roads. Saw nothing. Then all of a sudden, I was hit. No sight of flak ahead of time or anything else. Just hit. The airplane just lost control and started rolling. I was here with no control with the stick whatsoever and ejected out the side. And normal is up to when you eject and then reach for the alternate handle. And out through the canopy and stuff, but I ended up, the chute didn't open until I pulled the D-ring.
So your barometric actuator for your chute on your seat decided not to function that day.
It appeared to. I don't think I was that fast. But it's a good thing it didn't open right away, because after a few swings, I could still see the sparks from the AAA coming up at me. But then again, swing a few times down into the trees, but it was a soft landing because the parachute stuck up in the trees and my feet hit the ground. So it couldn't have been any better as far as that part.
But you still got banged up. You had
some
kind of injury you had to tend to first.
I just had a scratch, a cut on my arm, I guess, going through the canopy and stuff. Bandaged that up, and then took my bright shiny helmet off and hid it under some brush. It was getting organized when I heard them coming after me from two sides, the east in the north.
Now, had you made a decision prior to the flights about whether or not to carry a personal arm?
Oh, yes, I had. Up north, I didn't carry my weapon. I did carry a knife, but I didn't carry the pistol, because up north they'd capture you and haul you off. Down south, I carried the pistol because they didn't have any place to keep prisoners. They'd end up shooting you. So I figured if down south I'd keep the pistol with me, but up north not, because I'd probably gotten into trouble. And as it was, I probably used it when I shouldn't have during those 2 days down. So I'm glad I didn't have it with me.
Okay, so you're just down in the trees. You got yourself patched up. You've only got a knife. Did you have any difficulty getting out of your harness, parachute harness, hanging from the tree?
No problem at all. And I kept the G suit on for protection on the brush and stuff for a while. Later took that off. But like I say, the enemy was shooting up in the air and yelling back and forth to each other. I don't know whether they're trying to flush me out or something else, but I got behind a rotted out log and got pretty well hidden. And they came within 10 or 15 feet of me, but walked right by.
And so you had to wait until you were
I waited
sure
until
that
things
they were
got
clear.
pretty quiet and
Okay.
they were out of the area. And then my survival heading was 190 miles south. A little unrealistic at the time, but that's when I started heading in a southerly direction. And before it got dark, I ended up on the edge of the bivouac area. A great big area that they had tents and fires and stuff like that going on. But I said, it's thick as the brush is. There's no way I'm going to be able to get it all the way around the bivouac area before the morning. So what I did was stayed there until it got dark and things quieted down in the camp. Only, very few campfires were still going. And I started slowly crossing. And actually the route was not bad, but it's overcast, no moon at the time, a little bit of drizzly rain. But it was clump elephant grass, so you could kind of walk around slowly so you didn't make any noise.
But you still had a couple of embarrassing encounters with obstacles while you're transiting through the middle of their camp.
Embarrassed only because I didn't know what they were until it happened. I was walking along slowly, taking one step at a time, being quiet, and just fell headlong into one of those trenches that they had dug to jump into when they were shooting up at the aircraft. And trying to not burst out with noise when that happens. But it was easy to get out if they had steps at one end, but not where I went in.
Did you also have to untangle yourself from
I did. After that, I was going slow again and just caught something across the face and shoulders. And took me a little bit, but I realized it was a volleyball net.
You clotheslined yourself on the volleyball net.
Yeah, right. That was the last incident during the bivouac area. When I got to the other side, I was able to climb up ridgeline. But before I did that, I had to cross a road. I said, I hadn't seen this road before. And the other side of the road, before I got to the road, trucks were starting up. So I ducked down again in the tall grass. The trucks came out onto the road, lights on. I figured at night they'd have them hooded or something, but they didn't. They had the lights on bright. 3 trucks came out with the canvas backs covered and went down the road.
Do you think you might have had a tactical advantage in deciding to get on the other side of that bivouac area early in the escape?
I think I lucked into that, not realizing it. But I think going across the bivouac area at night, the next day they were looking for me where I went down. And
so they're looking in the opposite direction from where
Exactly.
you're actually moving.
Exactly. But then, and I haven't able to talk to my wingman Dan Gilner, because when I went down, I tried my radio and the on-off button fell off of it. And so it was, you could hear a hiss from it, so I had to find a stick that wasn't rotten on the ground and stick it in to keep the thing from making noise at all.
So basically, prior to transiting through the enemy camp, you were Nordo with your potential rescuers.
Hadn't talked to anybody yet.
They had no idea that you were even on the ground alive.
No. But after I had to bivouac there and up the next ridge, I found a comfortable spot, laid down, and then heard a high altitude aircraft. It was the Air Force 101, was out on a IR mission, infrared, looking for me, I guess. And talked to him on guard. And so that was the first transmission so that word got back to the ship, and they knew I was still alive. So that next morning, aircraft from the carrier ADs, A4s, well, in the area.
Now, you've been on the ground for over a day now.
Not quite.
Or just about a day. How did you sustain yourself? You didn't have a full pack of rations with you.
No.
Or water, for that matter.
Adrenaline, I think. I wasn't hungry the whole 2 days. Thirsty, yes, all the time. But it rained enough so the big leaves, you could get the water off the big leaves, so that was fine. But not hungry at all.
Could you describe the environment you were in, with the terrain and the foliage was all like that you had to contend with?
It was mostly bamboo foliage. Thick. The ground foliage was really thick, hard to get through. You had to go around and pass and stuff like that. Wet from rain every day, hot and humid, cold at night because you're wet.
And did you have to do anything special to try and keep your body warmth, particularly at night?
Not really. I didn't. You felt chilly, but that's okay. You were tired.
And did you have any trouble with the insects or any other?
Just leeches. Leeches.
Oh, okay. What happened with the leeches?
Well, you're crawling around a lot in wet, muddy, forested areas, and ended up pulling leeches off arms and stuff like that. Exposed areas.
So you wish you had your cheese suit.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you're starting your second day. You've at least had contact with the outside world, and they knew you were alive. But the trouble was they couldn't get to you right away.
No, well, problem was I was still too close to the AAA sites, and the A1s and A4s were coming in, and also Air America. I didn't know it at the time. I saw T-28s. It was Royal Lao markings. That was.
And then they think about getting you out.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that next day, actually, I was going up to the next ridge line, and there was a path. But I heard some noise, so I got off the side again, and
It wasn't a clearing.
Not really a clearing. It was just lighter forested, and the trees weren't quite so high. And there was this one tree that had fallen down kind of at a 25 to 30 degree angle. So to help things out, I climbed up that as far as, it was a big one. Mm-hmm. So I walked by that as far as I could, and got a hold of the coordinator, and told him, hey, it looks like this is a good spot. And they said, well, we're not exactly sure where you are. So I said, okay, I'll fire a pencil flare. And I fired it, and I said, did you see that? And he said, no, we didn't see that. Okay, let me fire another one. Fired another one. Did you see that one? No, we didn't see that one either. Okay, one more. Fired another one. Nothing. They didn't see that either. I said, okay, let's vector in on me. I hear the helo. So let's get it close. So I just vectored the helo in over the top, and then I lowered the horse collar, climbed on, and up I went.
So they basically had to find you by sound, and you had to yell at them, okay, now I can hear you, now you're right overhead.
Come on, right, yeah.
I understand, too, that even though here you are, you're perched several feet, about 20 feet or so off the ground on a round trunk of a half-fallen tree, they still couldn't get the horse collar to quite reach you, and they had to come up with some kind of improvisation.
No, they did. The horse collar did
Okay.
reach me in that area. The problem is the crewman, when he pulled me into the helo, said, "Did I hit you?" And I said, "What do you mean, did I hit you?" And he said, "I dropped my submachine gun." Oh no, I didn't see a thing.
So, what's it like then to be hoisting up, coming up to onto the threshold of a helicopter right over enemy territory?
Yeah, just being in the horse collar felt like salvation.
And of course, they took you right back to forward base at Thailand.
They took me to a Lima site there in Laos that they had,
Okay.
and then Caribou took me down to Udorn.
How much of your successful evasion do you attribute to your Seer training you'd received as an aviator, or is it just circumstance?
I think most of it, was from Boy Scouts and just being in good physical condition from wrestling for 8 years before that,
The ability to stand perfectly still or keep yourself perfectly still.
and be quiet and then and do what you had to do physically when you had to do it.
Now, you had a tumultuous welcome when they finally brought you back to the Midway, and describe for our guests what exactly your squadron mates did on your behalf.
Well, I got back aboard the ship, and they all came running out to the A3 that brought me back aboard from Udorn, and lifted me up in the air. They're all cheering. It was good to be back.
Now, it turns out that the Navy wasn't quite through with you with the outcome of your successful escape, so you did have a lot of business to attend to on this when you got back stateside, even while the deployment was still going on.
Yeah, they sent me back stateside and went to the Pentagon and debriefed, and then they sent me to the Naval Academy and talked to the class there on. And then I talked to San Diego, the escape and evasion instructors and that kind of stuff, and then back to Midway for
The rest of the tour.
Rest of the tour.
Now, as we've already covered earlier, your career went on from there. You had a remarkable series of extracurricular flights as a flag lieutenant and a test pilot school, but your career kept going, and in addition to your very successful squadron command, where you received an award, the squadron earned an award under your tenure, you went into the pipeline for Deep Draft Command, and you served as Ops and XO on the Enterprise, but you're heading for a nuke. So what additional education did you need to prepare for that?
Well, that's another funny story. I was waiting for Air Wing Command selection, VCAG, and I got a call from DCNO of Air at the time, 05, and said, "Rickover wants to talk to me." I says, "Okay." So I went over to get interviewed by Admiral Rickover,
Who was the head of the nuclear program for
who
the
was the
Navy
head
at the
of the
time?
nuclear program, and I said, "Well, this isn't really what I want to be KAG. I don't want to be a nuke." But sitting on one side of Admiral Rickover's desk and he on the other, and he gets you so mad so fast that I was pounding on my side of his desk as he was pounding on his side. Why, I don't know, but and the interview was over, and so I went back to the squadron. A few days later, I got a call that said, "You're accepted." I said, "What?" And that started my nuclear career.
So now you're, whether you like it or not, you're heading for Deep Draft Command.
School, and nuclear power school and deep draft. And
So what was it like to undergo Navy-style education methods with nuclear power?
well, I was in a class of about 30 folks, and I was a commander, and they were all ensigns and JGs fresh out of school and college. And so the training was fire hose, Navy training. So the first 6 months was all book work and in Idaho and in Mare Island, California. And so I was the bottom of the class. Then we went 6 months to Idaho Falls, which was a prototype where you stand watches, you're doing school work and standing watches. And of course, my experience in the fleet, I rose to the top of the class by then, because the new guys were trying to figure out how to stand watch and do things like that with valves. And then off to being Ops and XO on Enterprise.
And then, of course, after an intermediate tour of command of the Wabash, a replenishment vessel, you had the grandest assignment of all, and it was command of the Nimitz.
The Nimitz.
And she was in the Atlantic at that time.
Yes, she was. I met her in the Med.
So you had some interesting excursions, meeting all kinds of fascinating people with the Atlantic Fleet as commanding officer of the Nimitz. For sure.
We pulled into Monaco, met Prince Rainier, had dinner with him, and it was great.
And the King of Norway as well?
King of Norway was aboard. And we sat off Lebanon for a while.
And of course, you move into flag rank as well, with a lot of high-profile staff assignments, a lot of them in Europe, as it turns out. But you also had another critical operational command, and that was of Commander of Carrier Group 6 in the 1980s. And so now that you've seen not only things from the operational perspective and from a ship command perspective and as a staff officer, but now you are the admiral on the group. How did the perspective change, if at all?
What got me the most, I think, taking over as the carrier group commander, was I had time to think of the tactics we should be using as a battle group and that kind of stuff. In the squadron and other jobs I had in nuclear power and stuff, you're so busy doing now that you don't have time to think forward and plan too much. This was, and actually my battle group was on the Roosevelt with sister ship to Midway, and was able to plan long-range strikes against sister carrier coming from the Med as we were going to the Med, and those kind of things. It worked out well.
And then, of course, the culmination of your career is Deputy Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Naval Forces Europe, and I would suspect that probably one of the highlights must have been leading the procession of U.S. Navy ships into a recently former Soviet naval base at Sevastopol. What was that like?
It was. At the time, I was there in London, the deputy chief, and the 6th Fleet commander was stuck because of Lebanon. He was stuck there in the Eastern Mediterranean, and this opportunity came to take 2 ships into Sevastopol just soon after the wall had come down in Germany. So I was tapped. So boarded the gates and with the Kaufman went up through the Dardanelles into Sevastopol. The first ships to go into the ex-Soviet Union.
That must have been an extraordinary visit to meet your what would have been your erstwhile opponents as the Cold War got hot.
It seems funny at the time, but everybody looked just like us. You know, everything looked the same. They were all happy, and Sevastopol kind of in a resort city there on the Black Sea. So it was a good time.
Well, thank you very much. So let's turn over to our audience and see if we have any questions or observations from our chat box. Okay, well, it looks like we are running a little short on time, unfortunately, but really would like to thank you for your personal appearance here to join us here for this Destination Midway episode. On behalf of a grateful nation for all the dedication that you've contributed and the sacrifices that you have made alongside your comrades, both as a junior officer and in very responsible positions as a flag officer, we really appreciate the 30 years that you devoted to this nation's cause. And we look forward to being able to have you aboard again in future events. You were exceptionally informative, had such a colorful career, and we really appreciate having you here.
Thank you,
to contribute. And so, once again, I'd like to remind everyone that this is a regular webcast, and if you'd like to make a donation to the USS Midway Museum, please visit our website at www.midway.org. And also, be sure to follow us on social media to check up on the latest developments and what our upcoming episodes for Destination Midway will be. And so, with that, fair winds and following seas, and please remember all those who have given their all in the defense of this country on this Memorial Day weekend. Good day.